I stood at the teller window of Oak Ridge National Bank holding a crumpled $40 electric bill and my husband Julian's debit card, hoping there was just enough left to avoid a shut-off notice. For 18 months, I loved Julian for his kind heart, raising his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, in a tiny two-bedroom apartment while we clipped coupons and counted every penny. When the branch manager looked down at the terminal screen, his hands suddenly began to shake. The color drained from his face, and he immediately stood up, locking the private office door behind us. Whispering in pure disbelief, he looked at me and gasped, "Ma'am, do you genuinely have no idea who your husband actually is?" That single question unraveled an unbelievable double life, unlocking an empire of wealth, a hidden past, and a truth that instantly shattered everything I thought I knew. My name is Clara Bennett. At 27 years old, I make a quiet living as a freelance children's book illustrator, spending my days sketching watercolor fairy tales at a worn-out wooden desk. 18 months ago, I fell in love with Julian. He was a kind, humble 32-year-old single dad who worked long hours as a local woodworking handyman and carpenter. From the very first day I met him and his sweet, 6-year-old daughter, Lily, I knew they were my family. Julian didn't have much to offer in terms of luxury, but his heart was pure gold. We lived in a drafty, two-bedroom, second-floor apartment on the outskirts of town. The plumbing groaned in the winter, the floorboards creaked under every step, and we drove a rusted 10-year-old sedan that rattled whenever we went over 40 miles an hour. Every week was a careful balancing act of clipping grocery coupons, tracking every dollar on a chalkboard in our tiny kitchen, and turning down dinners with friends to make sure Lily had fresh school supplies and new shoes. Even when money was tight, we were happy. Julian worked until his hands were covered in calluses and sawdust, coming home with a tired smile just to read Lily bedtime stories and hold my hand on the balcony. Then came a freezing Tuesday morning that pushed our tiny budget to the edge. I found a bright pink final shutoff notice from the electric company slipped beneath our front door, demanding an immediate $40 overdue payment by noon. Julian was already across town on a roofing repair job and couldn't leave the work site. He called me during his brief morning break, sounding exhausted and full of apologies. "Clara, I'm so sorry," he said over the static of the phone. "My debit card is on the kitchen counter near my keys. Take the $35 cash from the ceramic jar, deposit it at the local Oak Ridge National Bank downtown, and swipe the card to clear the bill before they cut the power. I'll make up the difference with extra weekend shifts, I promise." I grabbed the card, slipped the worn bill into my coat pocket, and hurried out into the winter chill, completely unaware that this routine errand was about to flip my entire universe upside down. The winter wind stung my cheeks as I hurried through the brass double doors of Oak Ridge National Bank. The lobby was quiet, smelling of polished wood and damp coats. I took a numbered ticket, stepped up to the nearest teller window, and slid Julian's scratched debit card along with the $35 in cash across the marble counter. "Good morning," I said with a tired, polite smile. "I'd like to deposit this cash and then use the card balance to pay an urgent $40 utility bill, please." The young teller, a young man named Kevin, greeted me with a nod and swiped the card through his terminal. For a few seconds, only the rhythmic clicking of his mechanical keyboard filled the air. Then, the clicking abruptly stopped. Kevin's eyes widened behind his glasses. The computer monitor let out a harsh, high-pitched error beep, flashing a bright crimson banner across the screen that read, "Tier 1 Executive Security Lock. Mandatory management override required." "Is something wrong?" I asked, my chest tightening with anxiety. "Is the account overdrawn? Did the card get locked?" Kevin didn't answer. He swallowed hard, his face turning completely pale as he stared at the readout. Without typing another key, he stood up so fast his rolling chair hit the back partition and practically ran toward the corner office. Moments later, the glass door swung open. Out walked Mr. Harrison, the senior branch manager, a seasoned banker in his late 50s known for his calm, unflappable demeanor. He approached the teller station briskly, keyed in a secondary supervisor security code, and leaned in close to the screen. As the encrypted secondary ledger decoded before his eyes, Mr. Harrison visibly stiffened. His hands, resting flat against the marble divider, began to shake. The color completely drained from his face, his jaw dropping in utter, unvarnished shock. He didn't speak to Kevin. Instead, he looked past the partition straight at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. He walked around the counter, gestured toward the private executive suite, and motioned for me to follow him. The moment I stepped inside, he closed the heavy oak door, drew the privacy blind shut, and turned the deadbolt lock with a solid click. He pulled out a leather armchair for me, his voice trembling to a low, reverent whisper. "Ma'am, do you genuinely have no idea who your husband actually is?" Mr. Harrison gasped, clutching a freshly printed balance sheet like it was explosive material. "This isn't a standard checking account. This card is an unrestricted black-tier institutional ledger tied directly to an active 9-figure sovereign portfolio holding hundreds of millions in liquid capital." The room spun around me as Mr. Harrison turned his high-resolution desktop monitor toward my face. My breath caught in my throat. Displayed on the screen were verified national business registries, corporate charter documents, and prominent national news archives. Sitting before me in sharp, high-fashion tailored suits and speaking at international economic forums was my husband. His name wasn't just Julian Bennett. He was Julian Thorne, the elusive founder, majority shareholder, and technological mastermind behind Thorne Logistics and Renewable Systems, a clean energy infrastructure empire valued in the billions. "Your husband isn't a handyman, Mrs. Thorne," Mr. Harrison said gently, resting a cup of water on the coaster beside me. "He built one of the largest sustainable freight networks in North America. But 4 years ago, following the tragic passing of his late wife in a private clinic, his estranged extended family launched vicious corporate lawsuits, trying to wrest control of his company and use his young daughter as leverage in court. Julian walked away from public life, placed his entire fortune into an unlisted sovereign trust, and vanished into complete anonymity to protect Lily from opportunistic predators." I sat in the plush leather chair, my mind racing through the last 18 months of our marriage. I remembered the late nights Julian spent bent over our kitchen table, sketching intricate mechanical designs into old spiral notebooks, which I had simply assumed were woodworking plans. I remembered the beat-up pickup truck he drove, the second-hand winter coats he wore, and the quiet contentment in his eyes every time we managed to stretch a $20 grocery budget into an entire week's worth of dinners. None of it had been a lie about who he was as a man, but the scale of his reality was staggering. Every single coupon we clipped, every sacrifice we made, and every drafty night in our tiny apartment had been part of a carefully constructed fortress designed to give his daughter a normal, humble childhood far away from greedy relatives and camera lenses. He hadn't hidden his wealth out of deceit or malice. He had hidden it out of absolute protective instinct, carrying the weight of a massive empire in total silence, just to live a life built on authentic love, honesty, and simplicity. As Mr. Harrison handed me the sealed executive portfolio containing Julian's verified financial credentials, my heart pounded against my ribs. I knew our quiet world was about to collide with a storm, but I also knew exactly whose hand I was holding. I drove back to our neighborhood with the sealed leather portfolio resting quietly on the passenger seat beside me. The brisk winter afternoon was setting in, but my mind was completely on fire with questions. Yet, the moment I turned onto our street, any hope of having a quiet, private moment to process what I had discovered evaporated into thin air. Parked directly across our small apartment building's narrow driveway was a sleek, imported luxury sedan, engine idling aggressively. Leaning against the hood in tailored designer overcoats were 2 people I had only seen in distant photographs: Julian's estranged cousin, Bradley, and his overbearing aunt, Beatrice. As I stepped out of my car clutching my bag, Beatrice turned toward me with a sharp, patronizing sneer. "Well, look who finally crawled back to this dump," Beatrice announced loudly, loud enough for our neighbors on the ground floor to hear. "Are you the penniless little artist Julian dragged into his pathetic downward spiral?" Before I could answer, Bradley stepped forward, waving a red-stamped legal folder in my face with an arrogant smirk. "You'd better start packing your paintbrushes, Clara. My private investment group just finalized the acquisition note on this entire apartment complex. This building is being designated for immediate commercial redevelopment, and your lease is being terminated as of midnight tonight. I stood my ground, my voice calm and completely steady. Julian and I have a valid, paid lease through the end of the year. You cannot simply force families onto the street. Bradley let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Your lease doesn't mean a thing against our syndicate's capital, honey. Tell my broke cousin that his little handyman fantasy is officially over. He cost our family millions by abandoning the corporate board, and now he owes us. If he wants to live like a beggar, he can sleep on the sidewalk. Just then, the familiar rumble of an old pickup truck echoed down the block. Julian pulled into the parking bay, his work boots dusty from a hard day's labor and sawdust clinging to his worn canvas jacket. Seeing his relatives cornering me, Julian stepped out of the vehicle immediately, his expression shifting from exhaustion to sharp, protective focus. He moved swiftly to place himself between me and his family, his broad shoulders shielding me from their venom. "Leave Clara out of this, Bradley," Julian said in a low, measured voice that held no fear. "Whatever issue you think you have with me, you take it up with me alone." Bradley adjusted his silk scarf and stepped closer, looking down at Julian's scuffed boots with open disgust. "The time for talking is done, Julian. We bought your building, we hold the deed, and we are putting you and your daughter out on the street tomorrow morning unless you sign over your remaining family trust allowances right now." Bradley and Beatrice pushed past us, stomping their expensive leather shoes right into our tiny living room without an invitation. Beatrice looked around the modest space with an exaggerated shudder, using the tip of her designer umbrella to nudge our worn dining chairs aside. "Sign the release for the family trust dividends, Julian," Bradley barked, slamming a thick legal document onto our scratched wooden table. "Or by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, a county sheriff will be here throwing your daughter's toys onto the sidewalk. You don't have the money for a deposit on a new place, let alone legal fees. Accept reality. You lost." Julian stood beside the table, completely unbothered, his jaw set in quiet resolve. He looked at his cousin not with fear, but with deep, patient sorrow. He had endured months of their arrogance to give Lily a peaceful, grounded upbringing, but I could see the steel in his eyes. I stepped forward, breaking the silence before Julian could speak. "You came all the way out here to threaten a family over an old grudge, Bradley. But you made one critical mistake." Beatrice let out a high-pitched cackle. "And what mistake would that be, little girl? You think your coupon savings can stop an institutional eviction?" "No," I replied calmly, looking Beatrice dead in the eye. "Your mistake was assuming you held any power here at all." I unzipped my tote bag, reached inside, and placed the heavy, gold-embossed leather portfolio from Oakridge National Bank right in the center of the table, directly over Bradley's cheap eviction notice. Julian's eyes flickered with instant recognition. A faint, knowing smile touched the corner of his lips as he realized I had been to the bank, met Mr. Harrison, and uncovered the entire truth. The gentle, weary carpenter vanished in an instant. In his place stood the formidable founder of an international energy empire. Julian slowly straightened his posture, crossing his arms with an authority that seemed to instantly shrink the room. The air grew ice-cold. "You shouldn't have brought your threats into my home, Bradley," Julian said, his voice dropping into a deep, commanding baritone that made both Bradley and Beatrice freeze. "You came here looking for an easy shakedown against a man you thought had nothing left. But the game is over. You're about to find out exactly who owns the ground beneath your feet." Bradley stared down at the black and gold sovereign portfolio on the table, his confident smirk slowly curdling into pure, unvarnished dread. Julian didn't raise his voice. He reached into his canvas jacket, pulled out a sleek, titanium-cased smartphone that looked completely out of place against his dusty sleeves, and tapped a single speed dial contact on speakerphone. The call connected on the first ring. A sharp, distinguished voice echoed through our small living room. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thorne. Global Legal is on standby. How may we execute?" "Good afternoon, Arthur," Julian replied smoothly, keeping his gaze locked on his pale-faced cousin. "My relative Bradley has formed a predatory holding group that claims to hold an acquisition note on the Elm Street apartment residential complex. I want the debt, the land parcel, and every associated commercial mortgage purchased outright through the sovereign trust immediately. Clear the transfer, waive all pending eviction filings against every tenant, and execute full legal foreclosure against Bradley's personal equity firm for unauthorized leverage. Understood, Mr. Thorne. Wire disbursement of $82 million authorized and settled through Oak Ridge Central Clearing. The complex deed is registered in your name as of 3 seconds ago. Furthermore, our forensic team has already flagged Bradley's fraudulent financial statements with federal commerce regulators. Process servers are currently pulling up to your location. Bradley's phone suddenly buzzed violently in his trembling hand, lighting up with frantic alerts from his commercial bank and business partners. His knees gave out, and he sank clumsily against the wall, clutching his chest as he realized his entire shell company had just been swallowed whole. Beatrice let out a terrified gasp, backing toward the front door. "Julian, you can't do this to your own family. We were only trying to bring you back to the corporate world." Before she could finish her sentence, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. 2 certified commercial process servers in dark suits entered through the open doorway, flanked by local property enforcement officers. They presented Bradley and Beatrice with red-sealed civil foreclosure notices and court summonses for corporate fraud and extortion. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," the lead officer stated firmly, handing the thick documents to Bradley's shaking fingers. "You are officially in violation of commercial interference statutes and trespass on private property owned exclusively by the Thorne estate. You have 2 minutes to vacate this building, or you will be removed in cuffs." Bradley looked at Julian with hollow, broken eyes, begging for a single word of mercy. But Julian simply crossed his arms, standing tall and resolute. Stripped of their arrogance, their leverage, and their stolen wealth, Bradley and Beatrice scurried out into the cold winter dusk, completely ruined by the man they tried to destroy. The quiet that settled over our apartment that evening was unlike anything I had ever felt. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness full of clarity and peace. Julian pulled out 2 wooden chairs and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. For the first time since I met him, the exhaustion in his eyes gave way to pure vulnerability. He reached across the table, taking my hands in his calloused palms, and told me everything. He explained the grief of losing his late wife, the cutthroat corporate world that tried to use his daughter as a bargaining chip, and his desperate desire to raise Lily in an environment where kindness and hard work meant more than bank balances. "I didn't keep it from you out of distrust, Clara," Julian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I kept it quiet because I wanted to be certain my daughter and I were loved for who we are, not what we own. And every single day, through every coupon and drafty night, you loved us with all your heart." Tears welled in my eyes as I smiled back, squeezing his fingers. True love doesn't care about private portfolios or dusty pickup trucks. It cares about character. The following month, Julian made a monumental move. While he retained his position guiding his renewable energy firm, he established the Bennett Thorne Foundation, transferring unconditional joint stewardship into my name. Together, we used the resources to fund community art centers, build modern public libraries, and provide full educational scholarships for children across the region. Looking out the window of our new sunlit home, watching Lily laugh as she played with our rescue dog in the grass, I realized something profound. Wealth can buy buildings, influence, and security, but it can never purchase genuine loyalty or peace of mind. Those things are earned through humility, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Bradley and Beatrice measured their worth in numbers, but Julian and I built ours on truth, and that is an empire no amount of money could ever break.